I'm speaking with you today from Emmanuel Church in Waterloo, Ontario. Now imagine you've been invited to be interviewed on television, and the host asks you, now if you could invite anyone at all in the world to a dinner party, 5 or 6 people, who would you invite? And I started thinking about that, and I thought, well, I don't know, maybe a great athlete, Wayne Gretzky. Who else? Well, Bill Gates. Why not? Oprah, sure. And the Dalai Lama, sure, he could sit beside Oprah. Who else? I don't know, maybe some great rock star from the past, Mick Jagger, or who's ever left of the Beatles. I don't know. Who would you choose? Anyway, after you make your choices, the host then asks you, fine, why would you invite them? And you say, well, I've always been inspired by their work. I've always been interested and fascinated by them. And to be honest, I mean, they're rich and famous. Well, the Dalai Lama's probably not rich, but I get the impression he could be. He's certainly famous. And, well, look, Bill Gates. My goodness, instead of bringing flowers or a bottle of wine for the host, he might bring a laptop instead. Well, that would be great. So, yes, I think I'd invite them because they're rich and famous. And, hey, they might even invite me back to their place for dinner. That'd be a great trip. And then the questions get hard, and the host asks, fine, why not invite someone who is not rich and famous? And you say, well, because they're not rich and famous. I mean, they wouldn't be interesting. They couldn't invite me back to their place. I mean, no, this is my fantasy meal. This is my great what if. So, no, I wouldn't invite them. And so you're actually confused by the question until after the interview backstage you learn that the host was in fact Jesus. At which point you say to yourself, I probably didn't answer that correctly. Anyway, in this week's gospel lesson, Jesus is invited to the home of a leader of the Pharisees to a dinner party. Now, how he ever got that invitation, I'll never know, because Jesus was held in such high disrepute for hanging around with the people with whom he normally ate. But he accepts the invitation, and shortly after he arrives, he begins to critique the dinner guests. Well, how rude. And he says, oh, look at you guys, jockeying for the places of honor. What are you going to do when the host arrives and he asks you to sit down lower? Far better to sit down low and to be asked to move up. And then all the dinner guests are looking at each other, saying, who's this guy to be talking to us like that? And as if that's not enough, he then goes up to the host, and he doesn't suggest, but instead he says, look, whenever you give a dinner or a luncheon, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they invite you back and then you are repaid. But when you give a banquet, you invite the poor, the lame, the crippled, and then you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. Well, after that, I'm sure that Jesus was not invited to another dinner, not at that social level, although there would be many other dinners. One very famous one, perhaps the most famous meal in all human history, and we know that as the Last Supper. So what was going on at the Last Supper? I am sure that Jesus did not all of a sudden say to himself, we're running out of time. I better hurry up and institute the sacrament of communion for use by the church, which will come into existence shortly after my death and resurrection. No, instead, I'm sure that Jesus looked around the room. He looked at the disciples, these people who had been closest to him over the past 3 years, and he said, look, this is it. This is my lifeblood. This is me, body and soul. I'm not just talking about a meal here. I'm talking about presence, but a poured out, passionate, presence. This is about how we are present with people. This is about everything I've said, about the kingdom, about this inner wholeness. This is it. And so whenever you do this in the future, you think of me. And so there was Jesus presenting his life as banquet. Now, I also see Jesus here as interviewing us again and saying, what if your life is a banquet? Who is invited and who is not? Who gets to sit beside you and who does not even get a seat at the table? This would be Jesus inviting you to invite everyone without exclusion to come into this passionate and this poured out presence. There's the invitation. Will they accept? Will you? Thank you.